Good morning, everyone. Welcome to heycar's Break the Bias panel event in support of International Women's Day. I know that the official day was actually Tuesday, but I hope we can all agree that breaking down biases is something so important to consider and work on every day, not just once a year. And I think it's a journey that we're all on, both personally and collectively as businesses and institutions. So I really appreciate you all for joining us, and in particular our very impressive panel. So I do also want to send some regrets from my brilliant and rock star automotive colleague Karen Hilton, who was unable to join us in person today, but that also gave me the opportunity to be here with you. So thank you to her, and I know she's supporting us from online. I know many in the audience might have questions, so if you can just drop them into the Q&A button on your bottom of your screen, and we will address them at the end. I will leave some time, so thank you for that. So I'll start by introducing the panelists. To my far left, Fiona Howarth, founder and CEO of Octopus Electric Vehicles, which is the EV specialist leasing business as part of Octopus Energy Group. Before setting that up, she was also launching connected home products and for a British startup called AlertMe, which is now part of Hive and British Gas. She's also had positions at the Department of Energy and Climate Change and BMW, developing hydrogen-powered cars, which is really interesting. Next to her, we have Katie Black, the joint head of the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles. So her team is actually setting the government strategy, policy, and all of the delivery frameworks to achieve that mission for net zero emissions, net zero economy. And prior to that, she was also Director of Policy at the National Infrastructure Commission, has held roles in the Department of Energy and Climate Change as well. Next to her, Kirsten Stagg, the Head of Marketing at Skoda UK. She has more than 20 years of B2C and B2B marketing experience, holding various roles across Volkswagen Group and Audi. And prior to Skoda, she was also the Head of Volkswagen Commercial Vehicles Marketing. Welcome, Kirsten. I know she's also a mentor for the Mission Gender Equity for the Automotive 30% Club, which is really important part of the conversation today, so interested to hear more about that. And next to me, Moyo, the National Contract Hire Relationship Manager at Kia. She's also an award-winning automotive professional with experience across PR, sales, and finance. She won the Automotive 30% Club Inspiring Woman Award in 2020, and also the Automotive Press Officer of the Year Award at the News Press Awards that same year. So welcome, Moyo. So I think it's pretty clear that everyone on the panel is extremely accomplished. I think it's even more remarkable considering there is data that suggests that women represent only 20% of the automotive sector, and that drops to 10% at the executive level. So we have some of the very top with us today. So thanks for joining. Given all of that success, and the topic is breaking down biases, I'd love to hear, how have you done that? How have you gotten to where you are today? What are the biggest accomplishments or moments you're most proud of?
So I started off at uni, did a maths degree. I started my career in auto at Honda, doing a placement year there. Went back to uni, graduated, and then I joined Kia on a 9-month maternity leave contract. Definitely thought it was just going to be 9 months. Almost 8 years later, I'm still there. I've worked in press, as you mentioned previously, and now I am in fleet sales. My biggest accomplishment thus far, I guess, would be an article that I wrote with Auto Express. So I was interviewing some of the top senior people within the industry that don't fit the natural mold of, white man at the top of the industry. So interviewed people that fit into the BAME community, into the LGBTQ+ community, and spoke to Mike Hawes to get an understanding from the SMMT as well. So yeah.
Fascinating. Thank you.
No worries.
Kirsten,
Yeah, so I joined automotive not on purpose. I applied for the graduate scheme at Volkswagen Group because they were looking for linguists. I did Spanish at university, so that was what attracted me to the company, and then ended up staying in automotive for all this time, just because we were part of a big group and there were lots of opportunities. I think for me, it's been really interesting to experience all the different brands in the Volkswagen Group and kind of grow as a leader and show that there are different kinds of leadership styles. So automotive is very male dominated. You have a certain kind of person, typically very good with numbers, perhaps quite rational and analytical. So it's been interesting to be able to show that there's a different style of leadership, which quite often female leaders have, which is slightly more empathetic, perhaps a little bit more people-focused and down to earth. And my most proud moment so far, or most recently, is launching the ENIAC, which is really important for us because it's part of a new era, I guess, for automotive moving into electric vehicles. So that was really exciting.
Amazing, excellent.
Yeah.
Katie?
So I started off as a chemist. I did chemistry at university and then really wanted to... I've ended up in automotive coming through the sustainable energy route, so most of my jobs have been linked to decarbonisation and net zero. And the job I had as Director of Policy at the National Infrastructure Commission was looking at the UK's infrastructure needs over the next 30 years and trying to work backwards as to what government needs to do about it now. And that led me to my job in the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles, because as soon as it came up, I was like, that's what needs doing right now, and that's where I can make a real tangible difference straight away. And so I think that's, I don't know, I just feel I feel genuinely lucky to have my job, because I can see what's happening as a result of what me and my team
Quite a
do.
daunting task to take on, however, at the same time, right?
Yeah, but someone's got to do it. So why not? Excellent.
Yeah, and actually that really resonates with me as well, because I'm definitely here with a kind of like, let's problem solve the climate challenge that we have ahead of us.
Yeah.
So transport is a third of our carbon emissions in the UK. It's like a quarter globally. And actually that's a massive challenge. And like if you look at the carbon stats from transport over the last few years, we've done very little actually since like the 1990 levels, which is typically what's referred back to. And in the energy power sector, it's reduced by 60% the carbon emissions. But we've really done very little. So the opportunity for me to kind of get involved and help make this, help transform it has been so exciting. So although I'm super proud of the Hive work, you know, because Hive that you mentioned earlier, control your heating from your mobile phone. People can save like 15 to 18% of their gas just by turning it off when they're not in the house. And at times like now, those kind of opportunities, it's huge, right? And it saves people a lot of money, it saves a lot of carbon. But actually, like, transport is the next big frontier. Yeah. And it's such a big opportunity. But also cars like the ENIAC, and actually any number of the cars now that have been launched, these EVs, there's like 60 different pure EVs that you can buy. They're so good. Yeah. So it's just how do you help people discover them? And how do you help people like frame that in terms of thinking about how they charge, how they can fill up, and they can save money as well. So actually it's a really exciting and fun thing to do.
I can hear the passion, I love it. So I'm actually relatively new, just a few months into the automotive industry, so it's even more fascinating to hear your experiences. However, I'm also fortunate that my first experience has been here with heycar, who is a company that I truly believe values and embraces diversity and inclusion and how it operates and how it communicates, and that's not always the case. So in the industry, as we've just talked, that had not as much representation for women and broader diversity groups. What do you think the biggest challenges are within the sector for women to address?
I guess when we look at stats and, you know, what leadership teams look like at the moment, the pipeline for leadership teams and that kind of stuff, I guess it's having the talent. Women still are woefully low in numbers in comparison to men, so how do we attract women into the industry in order for them to progress higher up the ladder, in order for us to have the visibility, because over 50% of women in the UK hold driving licenses, so why do we not have a bigger portion of the pie, a bigger part of the conversation when it comes to shaping this industry?
So just being appealing and attractive enough to diverse groups, Yeah,
it's really interesting. I see that we've made really good progress actually at attracting people into the industry at the kind of the entry level. So our graduate programs and undergraduate programs are really perfectly balanced. I think the challenge that we all have is at the more senior levels, where you look across the industry, typically you might get 1 in 4 leadership positions held by women. So we don't have enough role models. And of course, when you have less people, it only takes a few individuals to leave and you're almost like back to where you started. So I think as an industry, we've typically recruited from within automotive. So you've always got the same pool of people. So you're not going to fundamentally change things quickly because it takes a long time to grow people through their careers. So I think we need to think more openly about different sectors that people could come in from. But, it's really interesting now, isn't it, with EVs, where you see that we've got different roles that are appearing that we never had before in kind of new development areas. So that's a great example of how you can bring more people in.
Very true.
I don't think the challenges are for women to address. I think the challenges are for society to address. And I've got a 2-year-old, she's a girl, and it's just mind-blowing to me that, she goes into a creche environment and she's given a doll to play with and the boy goes in next to her and is given a car to play with. That's why, and that translates all the way up into self-limiting beliefs, and girls just don't even consider these things because that's not what they're shown and given. And firstly, it starts right at the beginning, and secondly, we're not setting women up to succeed at all, and we're not setting up men to succeed either. My husband is in a totally inflexible job. I'm in a very male-dominated environment. I'm in a more flexible one. That already sets up a dynamic where I compromise more. It's the entire way that everything is set up.
Nurturing part of the dialogue as well.
Yeah, so I've got 3 points and you basically made them beautifully. So the first one was, it's much easier to be it if you can see it.
Right.
So actually, if you can see women in those leadership roles and you can see how they're doing it, maybe they're taking a slightly different approach, but actually that's another way of bringing a different element of leadership and actually can give another side to the team. So, continuing to promote that and people telling their story. So actually recently, my director of tech and I, another female, we jumped on a panel for primary engineer. Primary engineer are trying to inspire kids to go into engineering type STEM subjects. And so we did a panel with them and that's gone out to lots of different primary schools. We had some primary schools dial in at the time. And now off the back of that, they're designing things for this competition and they've written on it, it's like, who inspired you the most? And they're like Claire Miller, who's our female director of tech. And I just love that she's out there, she's visible really as the kind of leader in that technical industry. So much easier to see, be it if you can see it. The second one is around kind of nurturing. And actually what you see is with women, we're slightly more reserved in terms of being willing to take those more riskier positions. And there's actually stats that show that, we have to believe that we take 90 or 95% of a job description before we'll even think about applying for it. Whereas the guys, there's stats that show that they'll take about 60% and they'll put themselves forward. And they kind of back themselves to do the rest and they'll learn the rest on the job. Us as women need to back ourselves.
So some biases we have about our own
totally.
capabilities.
We definitely need to be braver, take the risks, because it also becomes self-fulfilling. Because if we don't take the riskier jobs, we don't get the experience, we're less likely to get the more riskier jobs and the kind of bigger jobs as we go through. And people won't see us doing that as well. So we need to back ourselves and back each other, because actually if there's a situation where women in your team might be less likely to take that more riskier job, but you know that they could, why don't you just reach out to them and say, have you thought about that? Have you thought about maybe putting yourself forward for that? And just encouraging them a little bit more. And then the third one's around flexibility. And I totally agree. It's not just about women's flexibility, it's about men's flexibility. So, to be honest, the pandemic and working from home, that's really helped my husband and I. There was definitely a less of a culture that he could work from home. He could be there if the kids were sick, for example, or be able to do the pickups. He's there much more frequently now. And that also reduces some of that mum guilt. I don't know if anyone else experiences it when you're not there. And you're kind of I really want to be at home with the kids. I love my kids very dearly. I don't want them to feel like their mum wasn't around. But now that he's around a lot more as well, that definitely eases it. And so the flexibility that we've got with the pandemic, I think, will help, enable more women to take on some of those more riskier jobs as we back ourselves.
No, it's an important point. These biases that we've had in terms of gender roles and, we'll give more flexibility to women, but not necessarily to men. And it also just touches on a broader point that we male allies are critical into the discussion, right? So otherwise we're just sort of in an echo chamber speaking to ourselves about how do we be more diverse and inclusive if we don't have the core leadership, the 80% that are actually also advocating, then it's a really impossible task. So on that, do you find that it's more challenging, or do you see that it's more difficult? All of those topics, having seen other industries, they're similar themes. Within automotive, have you seen specific gender biases, or have experienced that, or find that more challenging? Anyone that's seen? I know you've written about the bias that you've seen in the automotive sector. Well,
I guess it kind of goes back to one of the conversations that I had when I wrote the article that was specifically about education. And one of the people that I interviewed for the interview made the point that he's American, so he was specifically talking about America, and he was kind of like, there are scholarships that get unused, millions of dollars worth of scholarships, because parents aren't in a position to be able to sign up their kids to say, oh, like my child wants to do this, so I'm going to back them, because a child comes home and they're like, I want to do this, and there's a scholarship to go with it, and the parent's like, what does that even mean? Like, and that education piece of being able to say that our kids are bringing something home to us, so we're open to it, like, you know, we're going to have that conversation, is very much, I guess, like, you know, from the perspective of a black woman, like a black Asian type conversation. Like, I know in my house it was like, you're going to be a doctor, or you're going to be a lawyer, or like, and it was kind of like, oh, like, you're not going to do any of those things, and like my parents were kind of like, oh, so what are you going to do? Like, because that's not what we're talking about.
Right.
So it's very much about like opening the doors to opportunities, and for parents to be willing to say that's okay. Like
that's a possibility.
That's fine.
It's an opportunity.
So I definitely think that the education piece definitely still has work to go with it as well.
Yeah, within broader society, so that they can also encourage their children. Yeah. What do you think?
I mean, it's so obvious when you work in automotive. I remember, I've been working in automotive since before 2000, because I'm very old. And you'll turn up at a retailer conference, and there might be 100 people there, and perhaps 1 or 2 women. So it's very, you can't avoid it. It's really, really obvious. Which is why I think it is so important to have role models, and really credible role models, so that it then doesn't become a thing. Gender doesn't become a thing. You're just someone that's very good at your job that people respect, which is important. I think we need more of that. But to your question about bias, I think one of the most dangerous kinds of bias is unconscious bias, because by its very nature, people don't recognise that they're doing it. So they might, you know, it's human instinct, isn't it, to be attracted or feel like you connect more with people who are like you. So whether it's people that came from the same town as you or studied in the same university as you. And I think that can create an environment where you end up with lots of people who are very similar working together. And if those people are at the top of the organisation, then you end up with a leadership team who's all very similar to each other. So I think it's really important that everyone understands that we're all biased. It's not, you know, it's not
right.
Well, it's not a bad thing as such. It's human nature, and it's that you have to recognise it and kind of spot it almost before it happens, and work out what you're going to do to make sure that you don't let it influence your decision making, particularly when it comes to promotion and recruitment.
And which is interesting, because we know there's data that suggests there's a clear correlation between diversity and executive leadership and company profitability. Mm-hmm. So it has a bottom line impact, but yet it is such a challenge still to break down. So trying to find where to identify opportunities to make changes is definitely critical, but also in the interest of the business from just a pure profitability perspective.
I mean, it's bad. I feel like the pandemic in 2 ways has shielded. I feel like as a woman, it's shielded me from this gender stuff for a while. Firstly, because as Fiona said, there has been more flexibility. So achieving a gender balance in my own home has been a lot easier.
Right.
But then also just because you're behind a screen, you're not confronted by like the sea of men. And it's just, I went to my first in-person conference a few months ago, and I was just like, oh, and it's nothing against any of the men themselves, like it's nothing against, but it's just like that it takes way more energy to be in that environment because you are so conscious that you are one of the only women there, and it's tiny things, like I was speaking, I had to be mic'd up, they didn't have, I was wearing a dress with no pockets, and the guy just went, well, you're going to have to put that down your pants. And I was like, is there no other solution to me, like putting, you know,
Right.
like it's just these tiny things, and you don't realise how like energy sapping they are to like face up to until you've been out of it from a bit, and then you're thrown back into it. And so for me, I feel like the world sort of opening up again, hopefully, is sort of re-galvanising me a bit, because it's I'm getting angry again in a way that I realise I haven't felt for a while. 'Cause
Right,
It's just been, I've been protected by like, I'm just sat in my house.
So interesting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Depressing.
Well, I suppose change doesn't happen on its own, right? So we were back in isolated environments in our homes, and really the progress wasn't being made on all levels, certainly from a flexibility perspective, but not necessarily in any other way.
What I found fascinating about a meeting I had recently was I went with one of my colleagues, one of my team members, a guy, and I walked in and they kept talking to him. And it was a really long time since this had happened to me. I was super fascinated by it. And I was like, what? This is really odd. And of course on Zoom, you don't know who you're talking to, actually.
Right.
Like, it's not like they're making just eye contact with him, but in a face-to-face meeting in person. And I was like, oh yeah, this is what it's like.
Yeah.
Oh, that's weird. That's so why. This is so weird.
The level of deference always to, let's see.
Yeah, and you know, and it was really clear my role as well, and that also made me ask questions about why that individual that wasn't making eye contact with me felt uncomfortable about that. And so what, you know, because to the earlier points, right, in terms of bringing the men along the journey with you, with us, actually it was him that was feeling uncomfortable, and I was like, you know, maybe I am intimidating, I don't know, I have had that feedback before, but actually that's a classic, isn't it, that strong women are intimidating. So we've got to get men also used to women in leadership roles as well as us being used to it, you know. So I agree. Like it's remembering that, but also there are amazing men out there and women that are like making us all, you know, treating us all equally and fairly, and like.
Well, to that point, so what have your organizations been doing or working on to help break down biases? Have you seen some really success stories or initiatives that are gaining traction along the way?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things actually I was going to say is we're really struggling with recruitment in terms of actually just getting the applications in from a broad range of diverse groups. To your point earlier, this isn't just about women, this is about lots of diversity. So anyone that's listening, like, you should just apply anyway, because come and join us at Octopus CV. But we're definitely looking for that, and so we're looking at our job descriptions in terms of, you know, what are the words that we're using, how does that appeal to men and to women. And interestingly, we've been through that with some of our ops team, and we're getting some good applications. We're getting some amazing women joining our ops team. We're really struggling on the sales side to get good women into the sales side of the team. So we're like really going through that process now to be like, are we talking to like in a way that appeals to women, that makes them know that when they join, they'll be included, and you know, this is
Some
a
of that's
great
just
environment
industry
for them.
language, because it is a siloed industry. If it's only automotive, you forget that some of the terminology and the words and the things that you're using and how you direct conversations, the broader anyone who's from another sector may not actually understand.
It's so important though, isn't it? Because the reason I replied to the Volkswagen advertisement when I saw the job advertised in the paper was it said, you don't need to know what's under the bonnet. And I was thinking, oh, phew, because I mean, I don't only just got my driving license, let alone knew or understood anything technical about how cars work. So that spoke directly to me. Cause it kind of gave me permission to go, oh, this is okay. You can, you can do this, but it's really important.
Yeah, that's great. Isn't that a great example?
I think to touch on the point about language, like, so we've just had an internal job description type revamp, and like I'm ebbing ever closer to 10 years in the industry now, and I started in my current role back in May last year, and I think one of my very first meetings, acronyms were flying at me left, right and centre, and I was like, what are you guys talking about? And I've been in industry for almost 10 years, so actually, like, if Joe blogs on the road or Jill blogs on the road doesn't know the definition to something, like those of us that have been in the game for a long time, like, still don't know. So again, it goes back to apply if you think that you're probably 60% of the way there. Like, you can learn the rest on the job. That's the reality of it. But going on to like what Kia have done specifically, we have a women's network, we have a D&I leadership team, they have a scorecard that's reported into our senior management team on a quarterly basis, so looking at people that are applying for jobs, what brackets they fit into, that kind of stuff, to kind of understand like who are we appealing to and who are we not appealing to effectively. The job profiling that I mentioned before as well, and yeah, there's a lot of conversation about what can happen as well, and from a like the flexible working element and perspective as well. The Women's Network have been really heavily focused on our parental leave, so adjusting and adapting our maternity leave policies, our paternity leave policies, so that they are as inclusive as possible. So I think one of the policies is that like you can have up to 50 weeks shared parental leave, like if your partner's business also has that availability as well. I'm not a parent, so I don't really know the ins and outs of it, but, you know, like, it's really appealing to the parents. So, you know, as and when, like, that is where I am destined to go towards, like, you know, I know that they've already done the back work, the legwork for me to be able to say, yes, I work in a good company that will allow me to do that and have that flexibility. So, yeah.
I think that's such a great example, actually, because finding guys that, by the way, I know quite a lot of guys that are quite up for taking time off to hang out with their kids when they're young, right? In the same way that us as women have benefited to bond with our children in those early years. But actually, I find that it's harder for guys culturally, even if there is that policy in place to be able to do it. So almost when we talk about the role models, those role models are the men that are willing to put themselves out there to be the dad at home with the baby. They are role models that we should be cheering on and shouting about as well. Not just the women as well that are kind of, you know, in those leadership roles. Those men are taking leadership.
Absolutely. There's one in my team who's on paternity leave now, so it's
Yay,
absolutely
him.
critical. And are these initiatives fairly recent or something that's been building for some time?
I mean, we've always had a maternity and a paternity leave policy, but I think that we did a couple of case studies from people that have gone on maternity, have gone on paternity, and it was kind of what areas do we need to improve, what areas work quite well, and that went into a consultation period and has led to changes. So I think one of the issues that some people were having was like their keeping in touch days. They were kind of like, I know I've got them, but like I don't really know how I use them or what to do with them. So it was kind of coming up with an FAQ document that kind of hits all of those pinpoints that people have questions about that are not necessarily able to ask, or they're like, oh, well, I'm on maternity or I'm on paternity, so I don't want to call or I don't want to email because, you know, people are doing like real work, but actually like your job is waiting for you at the end of your time. So ask the questions that you need to ask so that you can hit the ground running when you do come back.
Sure, bringing them along and just being part of the
Exactly
journey.
that, yeah. Sorry, I was just going to say, making them still feel like they are part of the company. Just because they're not there physically doesn't mean that they're not there, full stop. Yeah.
Definitely.
Just to pick up again on the point about male role models, it's so important. And when I joined the leadership team in Skoda, our brand director at the time was a real family man. And he always, at 4:30, his wife would be on the phone. He'd be making his plans to get home to make sure that he'd put the children to bed. And it seems like a really small thing, but every day he would be prioritising his family. So then that gives everyone permission to go, okay, I'm going to do that as well because it's obviously okay. And you know, we're all adults, aren't we? And we're all responsible. So if you then need to go home and carry on working to get the job done, then people do that. And I think a little bit of flexibility for men and for women goes a really long way.
I completely agree. So Greg Jackson, who's our group CEO at Octopus Energy Group, he leaves early 2 days a week to pick up his kids. He'll often pick up the work later in the evening. I'm not suggesting he doesn't, but he takes that time and it's sacrosanct. It's really protected in his diary. And that's given permission for us to do it too. So every Tuesday, I also pick up my kids. I take them to gymnastics. I get some one-to-one time with each of them. It's really special, really treasure that time. But it gave me permission to do that.
Yeah.
It's kind of what I meant earlier about it's not serving anybody. It's not serving the dads because there's an expectation on them that they will prioritise the career, and that makes them, well, I don't want to speak for them, but like definitely for some people that makes them miserable. It's definitely hard for my husband. Like there's an expectation on him that I don't face, but the expectation is on women that they'll be the ones to drop everything and prioritise the family. And to push against that status quo requires work from both the men and the women. And you're right, we should celebrate the men who do that as well as...
Certainly that finding the right work-life balance is key for men and women across all industry sectors. What do you think that the automotive industry can do more of to challenge the biases that might exist and to influence change, maybe from an OEM perspective or the dealership side, and to also diversify the employee base? Because again, I feel that those challenges around work-life, the traditional gender roles probably exist everywhere in almost every company. But within automotive, do you find that there's anything specifically that could be challenged or addressed more?
Yeah, I think one of the areas that we've been trying to work on is not how do you accommodate part-time working or job shares, but at a senior level. So I think as an industry, we were probably always comfortable with it at a more junior level, but you wouldn't get the really juicy, strategic, challenging jobs. And we've started to see more of that in our company, and I'd like to see much more, because it's not only creating role models for up and coming members of the team, but it also proves to the leadership of how much value you can get. I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? You get a job share, you know, we've got lots of examples where it's 2 women sharing a job. You get so much more for your money because you've got 2 like super highly engaged, you know, really talented individuals instead of just one. I think it's a great win.
Yeah, that's super.
There's a lot of people that opt out, isn't there, of the marketplace because they can't get the flexibility. And so actually there's amazing talent there if you can unlock it in that way.
And I think one of the things that, again, came out of my Auto Express article, I spoke to Dash Gupta of Marshall Motor, and he said that one of the things that they had historically had was when it comes to like dealerships, like everything was like really heavily like commission focused. So they made the decision to like still have commission, but like everybody had a starting salary, and they saw that brought in more women, because women were kind of like, oh, okay, well, that like, you know, driving force of like, I have to make sales and I have to do that was kind of eliminated, and they could just make sales and have like a more gentle approach to it. And he was like, women were smashing targets, but they just felt so much more able to do it because they were like, there isn't that pressure of, will I be able to feed my kids at the end of the month, like pay my bills at the end of the month, if I haven't hit targets, because it was only commission based. So he was like, that was a model that really worked for them, and that they rolled out across like the whole Marshall Motor Group.
Interesting when obviously that can be expanded into gender bias and just compensation and inequality in compensation amongst men and women, which whether there's a more of a challenge in automotive than elsewhere, not sure.
And the roles of the typical kind of salesperson role where you know, it's all about a negotiation, perhaps isn't appealing to everyone. So I think it's really interesting to see how the roles are changing in the dealerships, where you're perhaps becoming more of a product expert, like particularly with EVs, there's so much to understand and learn, and everybody's learning it together. And then with, you know, when you throw in digitalization of the retail experience, your salespeople, they don't have to know the answer to everything if you can give them a digital tool that tells them all of the answers. So I think that's allowed some of our progressive retailers to kind of reframe some of the jobs. And we've talked about language before. Also what you call a job, the title that you give it as well can make it more appealing.
Yes, that's interesting. Obviously the transformation we're talking about, talk a bit more about how the new opportunities that creates, both in terms of ways to structure compensation, titles, the skill sets. What does that allow us to do from an inclusion perspective?
Yeah, well, actually, I was going to take an even more basic point from this transition, which is actually the move with more online sales.
Yeah,
just takes it out of the classic dealership. Now, there was a member of my team, and she joined, and she just couldn't believe that we were wearing flat shoes. I was like, what? It's like, you don't have to wear makeup every day? And I'm like, yeah, well, yeah. You don't have to wear makeup. And it was interesting, she'd been sent back to put on more makeup, and she'd been told that she wasn't allowed into the dealership without heels on. And I was like, oh, this is a different decade. It feels like a completely different era, right? And but actually, of course, this transition to more, like, you know, here we are at heycar, this amazing location, some amazing women around here, and some of you do look amazing. But, you know, there's not that kind of need to, there's not a kind of requirement to put on your heels, to put on your makeup. You know, you can be yourself. We very much nurture that as well. We say, don't hang your personality up at the door. You know, you get to be yourself in that environment. And I think those environments will really allow women to be themselves as well, and not kind of feel like they have to present themselves in a certain way and trying to fit a mold. So I think that kind of whole transition to more digital technology and tech companies really helps.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting, a bit more focus on the authenticity of the individual and how you can protect that and not have to conform to a particular perception of how the salesperson needs to behave and look.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
I mean, I came from energy, which is fairly undiverse, to transport, which is probably worse. And I think there's probably lessons.
And science, right?
Yeah. Well, there's probably lessons that transport and automotive can learn from those other industries. I think there are other industries that are holding up and celebrating their women a bit more. And
How so?
Giving them more recognition, so even basic things like panels and conferences. Like I said, that conference I went to a few months ago, very little female representation on the panels and the speaking. They told me, I was like, wow, this is really bad. And someone said to me, well, 5 years ago, out by all the cars, there were like still grid girls there. So that five years ago was the representation of women. And I think that really puts in perspective maybe how far, or a bit this needs a bit more focus in this industry than other places which have historically been a bit more, started off a bit more female.
Right.
Yeah.
It won't happen just naturally, will it?
No.
I think if we allow it to happen naturally, it'll happen too slowly. So we've seen good progress over the past few years, but nowhere near at the pace of change that we wanted to see. So I think,
but interesting. I do think that EVs, again, back to decarbonisation. I mean, you're a great example, Katie, and I know there are others as well. And I know that you were talking there about how excited you were in launching your electric car as well. I think that's bringing in more women into this space. I think, like, we get a lot of kicks out of doing something that's purposeful. You made the point, you make tangible impact, and it's making a difference. And so I think that's quite exciting. And so the combination of EVs and tech open up the space to
Online
women from
retailing.
other industries, which I think was also a great point made earlier, which is this is an excellent time for people, for women and other members of kind of the, with other skill sets to move into the automotive space and to help us transform it and disrupt it.
and it's quite exciting, isn't it? When things are changing, it's a good opportunity to
rethink,
reach out to different people and new people, and almost kind of give them a reason to reappraise. So it's like you might have, discarded automotive because you thought, it's just been the same for the last 20, 30 years, but now it's a really great time to come in.
I never thought I'd work on cars. And I love cars, I love driving, and I love working on sustainable energy. It's so weird to me. Even I'm not that old, but I would have written myself off from working in the automotive industry, and I've ended up in a sort of job that touches on it a lot, and I'm really happy to be here. But it's been through a different route, if you see what I mean. Mm-hmm. And it's. I think we should all be asking the question, why aren't people there are lots of women that love cars and love driving, even if you say they don't necessarily care about what's going on under the bonnet, but that doesn't mean that you don't have a passion you couldn't explore a passion working in the industry. And why aren't these people, why aren't we tapping into that? It's very...
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting question, but maybe you kind of end up talking to the way you're communicating, it might be to one particular audience, and this transformation that's going on within tech, direction in online retail offers you a way to have the conversation slightly differently, and electric vehicles, et cetera, so it might be drawing more interest into it. I think I certainly have thought, the perception of automotive as this kind of old, archaic, massive companies that maybe are a bit more inflexible, more archaic in terms of their processes, and this allows a bit more dynamism, I think, into the conversation for future employees.
Yeah, and if you kind of pull it all together, right? You love driving. There's 50% of the population, with driving licenses are female. We're buyers. We're so underestimated when we walk into dealerships, but actually now we can receive it in a different way online. We can go along online. We can research in a different way. And actually, there's this kind of what's going on under the bonnet. Doesn't matter. Women care about mobility, actually good mobility and fun, and it's fun. But it doesn't have to, you don't have to know exactly how it's working underneath the hood to enjoy driving a car. And so actually we get to test that now with more women on the teams that are kind of designing the experiences and the journeys. And actually that's, I think, your point earlier, which is more diversity helps us create better propositions and better products and talk to a wider audience. And that helps us create better propositions.
Yeah. And so how do we think government and business can work together to build more diversity and inclusion in the sector? Are we doing enough? Is there more that could be done? Do we have any specific ideas, or are there obstacles that have been put in place or roadblocks we're facing, so to speak?
I think the DFT as well as OZEV, have some amazing women.
They do.
They do have some really brilliant women. And actually, I think they've got some great leaders, and we talk about role models. And actually, I think that government has a lot of flexibility that has enabled people to job share and do things like that. And so I think there's a lot that we can learn from. And actually, back to the earlier points on conferences, getting more people to talk about that and what's enabled that is quite exciting.
Yeah.
And I know you spoke a bit about mentoring and some of the opportunities there. Do you find that, I've had these conversations before, that oftentimes it's like hiring. You might find someone who's already a high performer that then seeks out the mentor, and they become the one that gets fed through, rather than the broader employee base who might actually need the support, don't always find themselves in the position where they are being mentored and nurtured along the path.
I guess I definitely fall into the I've gone out and got it myself camp. And I definitely do believe that everybody has an element of, like, you need to be willing to put yourself out there to a degree. Like, things are not going to come to you if you don't put your head above the parapet to a certain degree. Like, you might have aspirations of, I don't know, becoming a director, but if you never tell anybody that you have aspirations of becoming a director, like, nobody's going to know. Nobody's going to open those doors for you, have those conversations with you. But yeah, mentoring, coaching are phenomenal. Like, they will open doors for you that you didn't even know existed at one point. You will be hopefully talked about in rooms that you're not even aware of, and that's how opportunities arise. And like, my mentor now, when we first started speaking, like, it was very, like, formal, and, like, I was like, I don't really know how this works, and, like, it was very, like, talking and above board, and, like, I can go into his office now and cry if I want to. Like, I've had days where I've been like, I just can't do what it is that we're talking about in that specific moment, and, like, he's brought me back down, and he's been like, this is how you can go about it. But if I didn't have that person there to be able to lean on to a degree, like, I potentially wouldn't have, like, I probably wouldn't be sitting here today. Like, I probably wouldn't have done the Auto Express article. Like, and you do need someone in your corner just backing you to be like, go on, you can do it. Like, but again, I go back to, if you're not willing to say that you want to do it, then no one will know that you want to do it.
Yeah, well, no, I think that's certainly true. You don't ask, you don't get. But at the same time, it's probably worth reminding all leadership that we have to ask the question as well. Can I help you? How can I help you? For those people who aren't putting themselves forward, it seems, and it's not always easy to remember. That's probably one of the biases we all have. Or we're too busy thinking about other things. Or if they're not asking, then they're probably not interested. When maybe they're just uncomfortable to ask. So.
I think also, it's not even just having necessarily one person, and it doesn't even have to be within your organisation. So there was some research in gender equality that Bain did a few years ago, and they recommended finding your board, your kind of informal board, and it's like, who do you go to ask that question or this question? And actually, I run a women's network alongside it, and so we've got people in marketing, we've got people in government, we've got people in, all sorts of different areas. And you can go along and you'll be like, I've got this issue, or I've got this situation. Have you got any advice? Have you experienced this before? And typically around the table, there's always somebody that's like, yes, I've had that. Let me talk to you about how we overcame that. And just having people like that you can bounce ideas off, I think, is super helpful.
There's so much to be gained from external networks as well, aren't we? I think lots of companies are probably quite good now at internal mentoring schemes. So I'm part of the 30% club as a mentor. And it's brilliant because you learn so much about other industries as well as meeting really talented people. So it's a real eye-opener. And if we want to expand from automotive to attract people from other sectors, then we do need to do more things to connect us with other sectors. So
yeah, it's great.
And are there any, we're nearly about to Q&A that I'll start asking some questions if there are from the audience and online. One is if you had any specific career advice, however, or top tip for a woman starting out in her career in the automotive sector, is there any few pointers?
Ask questions. Don't stop asking questions. It's as short and sweet as that.
Don't be afraid to not know the answers, right? So ask questions. That's great.
I think not specifically aimed at women, but I would always say to people, just take the initiative. The best way to get your promotion is to show that you can already do what's expected at that next level. So don't wait for somebody to ask you to do it. Just get out there and get stuck in and show you can.
I'd say two things. Firstly, check yourself for your own self-limiting beliefs, because going back to you have to ask for it, you might not be aware that something is blocking you from asking it if you haven't thought about why you're taking your own attitude. And the second is starting with really small wins to help build your confidence and assertiveness. So I remember really early on in my career, I felt really talked over by and sort of put down by a quite senior male colleague. And I just made myself go up and speak to him and said, actually, the way you spoke to me in that meeting made me feel really uncomfortable. And that was it was a tiny, it's quite a small thing, but it was such a major win for me in terms of just I back myself, I stand up for myself, so the more you do it, the easier it becomes.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree with all of these. Back yourself, keep testing things out.
Trust yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And if it doesn't work out, don't worry.
Yeah,
just try something else. And actually you keep trying it, find out what works. It doesn't matter, don't worry about failure. Actually the failure means that you're testing it.
Absolutely.
And you'll find the bits that work.
Risks. That's true.
Yeah.
So Nikki asks, have any of you experienced what you believe to be direct gender discrimination through a recruitment process? And if so, how has that influenced how you approach future interviews? Have you ever felt that experience?
I have in the past noticed that women are held to slightly different standards to men. So I have been in a situation where there'll be a male colleague who's being discussed for a promotion, and that colleague might be quite abrasive with colleagues, but that's just who, that's okay because that's who he is. Whereas a female colleague is just judged slightly differently because they're expected to be more empathetic, and of course, women and men, we're all different, aren't we? We're not. There's not just one type of woman and one type of man. So I have encountered that, and I think it's really important to call it out when you see it.
Yeah, that's actually really important, I think, to make it known when you've experienced it. Certainly. So Jack asks, thanks, Jack, for one of our men in the audience. What would your advice be to communicate internally and externally on the topic of diversity and inclusion, without it looking forced or a tick box exercise, and really more of a long-term strategy? I think that's a really, really critical question to address.
Yeah. Well, one thing we did actually around about the George Floyd incident is we had a really open conversation. It was, lockdown time, so it was on Zoom, and it was an optional lunch, and people could join us and talk about their own experiences of this.
Yeah.
And I think you start the conversation and you listen and you learn, and it applies to lots of different diverse groups. And since then, one of the more junior members of the team has taken it forward. It's called the Voices, and we have these optional drop-in lunches, and I've learnt loads actually. So I hadn't realised things like pronouns. There was this. I just hadn't really read up on it, and one of the guys took the time to join one of the Voices chats and take us through why pronouns were so important.
Absolutely.
And the background, and I got to change my social media and all that kind of stuff. But actually, I really appreciated him taking the time to explain that to us and share that his voice and why that was important in that community.
Yeah, so kind of making sure it's not just coming from one voice top down, that it's actually an engaged discussion throughout the organization.
Absolutely.
We have a People's Forum at heycar, which I think also helps to serve that purpose, but definitely key.
I think it's also about, going back to the strategy point, actually sitting down and mapping it out for the particular organisation that you're in. Where does diversity and inclusion make a difference? And as you said earlier, to the bottom line, to the actual results of the company. And if all of the leadership are bought into that, then it's not something that's a tick box exercise. It's something that's genuinely being done to make a difference to the company and what it's achieving. And that creates complete buy-in to it, and that is a strategy rather than we should probably talk about how we could get more people to do this. that feels tick box.
Right. That it's actually achieving a core company objective, which should bring people into the mix, but oftentimes is very focused on the bottom line delivery. So if you can make that connection, it's more powerful.
But as you say, those links are like, have been made. So
for years now, really.
So it's working, it's taking the time to work through how that actually applies in the context you're in.
And then it's so important, though, to make sure that actions don't undermine what you're saying, because really quickly it can unravel if people see an example of something that goes against it.
Yeah.
Sarah asks, what skills does the industry need with the transition to electric vehicles ahead of the government's ban on the sale of new petrol and diesel cars and vans from 2030? And how can women help fill these roles with new skill sets?
Should I take it?
Do you want to take this? Either one of you?
I guess
Fiona?
there's loads of different skills in terms of like how we help people discover electric cars and how they might charge, through to like designing those charge points and getting them into people's homes and workplaces and that kind of stuff. Even within businesses where they might be able to put in place a kind of employee benefit scheme around electric cars. You know, actually there are a lot of women in roles where they can take a leadership position in terms of helping that. And so across the board, whether it's actually in the industry or in industries where they can help pull and make that change, there's lots of different skills and opportunities. I think back to the earlier point around making a difference and there being a purpose, I think it's quite exciting for lots of people, but particularly they really resonate more with women. There's a lot of research that shows that. So I think there's a lot of purpose-driven roles available for that group.
So also just even articulating that that is such a core part of the agenda as well, that it has a bigger impact on society.
Such a big impact.
Lorna asks, lots of women love vans and trucks as well. That's true. Does the panel think we need more dedicated talent conferences like the ITT hub we're trying to set up? How do we think we get the messages out on the sheer volume of skill sets needed just to be in this fantastic industry?
It's a great question.
Yeah.
Having worked in vans, I can confirm that women do love vans and trucks as well. I had so much fun working for Volkswagen commercial vehicles. It was amazing. And probably if we look at it on a spectrum, vans and trucks are very male, that even more so than cars. So there's probably an even bigger job to do there to attract women in. But then as soon as they're in, they love it. So I think we have to do more. And of course, it's so much easier now, isn't it? With social media and LinkedIn, it's really important that people see what people are doing and what their job entails and how enjoyable it is.
It's interesting because I do think the skill sets are really transferable across many industries. So rather than having the conversation about what is the skill set specific to the industry, it's what's the broad skill set that you can then apply, and that can be more appealing to someone else. And then, oh, okay, well, it happens to be with automotive. That's interesting. Rather than you have to have automotive skill set to jump in, and then it already narrows the your recruitment base.
Because it's really just about people, isn't it?
Right.
So it's people making decisions about their mobility choices, which is why I love it, because it's about, how do people's brains work? How do you influence them to think one thing over another thing, or to nudge them through a journey? So
I love this idea, actually. So do you want a specific talent conference as well on this? Perhaps, but actually we want to appeal to people that aren't already thinking about it.
Right.
So if you're already coming to an automotive sector talent conference, you've probably already started to think about it. So how do we get beyond that?
Yeah.
And also, how do we reach these other more diverse groups? So actually by us, maybe, by the way, I'm just going to put this out there. We totally not plan this, but what if the panel, what if the women in the room, what if the women and other, diverse members dialed in, make a commitment just now, mentally, to go out and get yourself on a panel in a non-auto sector event, right? So that we are now talking outside of our sector to people elsewhere about what's going on and why they should come and join us.
Yeah, certainly. I think if the automotive industry only talks amongst itself about how to improve its limitations, then you're already in a challenging situation. It's where are the examples of great recruitment processes, really highly inclusive organizations or really innovative businesses, and being out either on panels with them or discussing with their leadership how they've made those gains to bring them into the automotive sector. It's a really good point. It's interesting. So Katie, we have a question specifically for you. What do you think about the skills gap in your role as the joint head?
I think that the 2030 ban is on the sale of new petrol and diesel vehicles is so interesting, because what it's done is laid a real marker in the ground in terms of electric vehicles, of saying, actually, this is not about early adopters and electric vehicles being for like richer older males, to use a stereotype, but that's statistically
Tesla drivers.
that is who does mainly currently own EVs.
Right.
How do we broaden that out? How do we make EVs just the default? How do we make every aspect of buying, owning, using an EV work for absolutely everybody who drives? And that's a completely different challenge. And again, a chance, I think, to reframe the sort of, this is what we need to deliver it, and this is what we need to do to reduce all of these emissions. As you say, cars and vans are 19% of the UK's emissions just on their own. Like but addressing this is the single biggest thing we can do to like reduce emissions. So I think there is a skills gap. There's a broader sort of net zero skills gap that translates across other industries as well. So I think that creates an opportunity to sort of attract new people into totally transforming like the whole industry, which it has to do anyway.
I think certainly patience is a critical one, right? It's definitely a difficult battle, right, where it's a process. So people who are willing to take on really ambitious challenges is certainly something that can be cultivated as well within an organization.
And not knowing all the answers, people are working it out, aren't they?
Yeah, we don't know the answers.
Well,
we're doing something new, which is what makes it cool.
And it's not going to happen overnight, certainly. So yeah, absolutely. What is the number one way we can make a substantial difference for women in the industry? Last question. Number one way. Anyone? It's a difficult one. That's tough. It's hard to drop that down into one. But
it's really hard to pick. But hopefully, between the four of us, we'll cover off enough good ones. I think for me, we need to really make a difference in terms of female representation at a senior leadership level. And I think to do that, you have to be very targeted and specific about what you do. So you do need to think about your development, your succession planning of your female talent, because it
women in leadership.
It won't just happen.
Yep.
Create jobs women want to do and tell them to apply for them.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, champion and cheer on risk taking. So people that put themselves out there, have a go.
Back them,
and even if it goes wrong, cheer them on.
Yeah.
They had a go.
And yeah, I think we go back to the language that is used in the industry, in recruitment, like just making it so that I don't need to know the jargon that goes on under the bonnet, but I know X, Y, and Z, so that means that that door is open to me regardless. So yeah, just language, I think. Automotive is fantastic and has lots going on, but actually anybody can work in auto and you can learn the stuff later on down the line.
I am proof of that. As I said, we're 3 months in, so I have to say I'm really encouraged by listening to all. So obviously lots of work to be done, but it's great to have such fantastic women leaders and role models already in place. So I think that's all of our time. Thanks so much for everyone who's joined us in the office and also online, and have a lovely day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.